And we welcome you to this Memorial Day edition of Happening Now. Hello, everybody. Good to be with you. I'm Connell McShane.
Hi, Connell. Hello, everyone. I'm Marthel Neville. President Trump paying tribute to America's fallen heroes earlier, laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington National Cemetery.
We are gathered here on the sacred soil of Arlington National Cemetery to honor the lives and deeds of America's greatest heroes, the men and women who laid down their lives for our freedom. Today we pay tribute to their service, we mourn alongside their families, and we strive to be worthy of their sacrifice.
Meanwhile, leaders from North and South Korea meeting over the weekend as a tweet from the president sparked new rumblings that his on-again, off-again summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un may be on again. Kevin Corke is live from the White House with the very latest. Hi, Kevin.
Hey there, Arthur. Always nice to be with you. Happy Memorial Day to you and yours. We'll begin there. Obviously today, a solemn occasion over at Arlington National Cemetery, a day full of speeches, salutations, certainly personal stories, and indeed song. A beautiful celebration of life and of all that is good in this country, and celebrating today's veterans, those past, those who paid the ultimate price and gave the most in their sacrifice for our very freedoms. As you pointed out, the president was there today, not only celebrating their lives and their memories, he also laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown, reminding all Americans of the ultimate sacrifice paid by those who defend our freedom.
This is a very special day. And today, our whole country thanks you, embraces you, and pledges to you. We will never forget our heroes.
Never forget our heroes, indeed. Also in attendance today, if you look right in the middle, Bob Dole, who received a thunderous ovation, the former Kansas senator who'll be 95 years young in July. He spent nearly 40 years on Capitol Hill, 6, by the way, in the U.S. Army, and was warmly greeted by the commander-in-chief along with the families of heroes lost.
Through their sacrifice, your loved ones have achieved something very, very special: immortality.
Meanwhile, an advance team, as you know, is already in Asia in preparations for possible talks between the U.S. and North Korea. Again, this is an interesting development because you may recall earlier last week the president said no go, and then, of course, things seem to change slowly and consistently. So we'll see if it actually happens. Let me take you to Twitter, where the president was talking about the idea that his team is not only on the ground but prepared and trying to make sure that this summit happens. The president saying the following: our United States team has arrived in North Korea to make arrangements for the summit between Kim Jong-un and myself. I truly believe North Korea has brilliant potential and will be a great economic and financial nation one day. Kim Jong-un agrees with me on this, adding it will happen. That, of course, following word of an unexpected meeting between the leaders of the North and the South, which seemed to support the notion that a meeting could in fact take place, perhaps on the original date of June 12th in Singapore. Now, I want you to take just a quick moment and listen to how the president on Saturday described the apparent change in tone from Pyongyang.
I think there's a lot of goodwill. I think people want to see if we can get the meeting and get something done. If we got that done, and if we can be successful in the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, it would be a great thing for North Korea. It would be a great thing for South Korea. It would be great for Japan and great for the world.
Great for the world indeed. By the way, no new news with respect to our team that's on the ground there, and that's certainly good news, meaning no new news about perhaps the North having a change of heart as we continue to look forward to what could be meetings on June the 12th. We'll keep you posted on any news that we get, but for now, again, happy holiday weekend, and back to you.
Kevin Corke there at the White House. Thanks so much, Kevin.
All right, in the meantime, we've seen the president and his legal team launching new attacks on Robert Mueller and the Russia investigation this weekend. President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, slamming the probe, claiming the basis for Mueller's investigation is illegitimate.
It further reiterates what I've come to conclude after 2 months of being in this, and the president obviously knew from very early on, which is this is rigged.
All right, joining us now is Kelly Jane Torrance, who's the deputy managing editor for the Weekly Standard. Kelly, good to see you. And in listening to Rudy Giuliani and that interview with Bill Hemmer on Fox News Sunday and some of his other appearances yesterday, do you feel as though his strategy, the political and or legal strategy that he's now implementing, is helping the president?
You know, Connell, I do. Now, a lot of people in Washington and New York have been expressing or claiming that they have worries about Rudy Giuliani. They think his appearances are a little out there. They think he might be harming the president. Well, I had to take a contrarian view to that. I disagree. I think Rudy Giuliani has a very clear strategy, and it's to go on offense. And he did it from the beginning. As soon as he joined Trump's team, you'll remember, he's talked about, hey, we need to bring this to a close. What can we do to bring this to a close? And that was a very different tone that from any of Trump's other lawyers. And I think we are seeing Rudy's strategy working because polls are showing more and more Americans want to see this probe end. And now we actually have a majority of Americans who think that the Mueller probe is politically motivated. And since we don't know anything about what's actually going on with Mueller's team,
Right.
that can only be from the things that we are seeing with the public opinion strategy. And I think Rudy Giuliani has done what he set out to do.
Use of terms like rigged, use of terms like illegitimate in terms of how the investigation got started, at least, is what Giuliani's been doing in almost all of these interviews. So you think it's actually moving the needle here. Where do we go next?
Well, one of the interesting things also, Connell, is Rudy and President Trump are both, they've got the moniker Spygate now to the news that an informant was, talking to people in the Trump campaign. Now, that actually doesn't have anything to do with Mueller's probe, but they are successfully tying those things together. So I think we're going to see those numbers move even more because people are, hearing these things conflated, even though they're separate. People agree. They think, hey, these things could be connected. And I think people will think it's even more politically motivated.
And the connotation, right, of a word like spy is much different than informant. And obviously, Mr. Giuliani and the president, they know that. So in using that, there seems to be, again, you're almost planting in people's minds that something is being done wrong, whether it is or not.
Yeah, Connell, as a writer with a philosophy degree, I love that we're talking about how much words matter and the meaning of words and what people think about the different connotations of words. Because, and it's true when you see reporting, you've got headlines from some organizations saying, spy in Trump campaign. You have others saying, Trump claims there's a spy, there's no spy. So, yeah, we're debating the use of words. And it's, given the fact that the media are most of the media are one mind, I think, again, that plays into Trump's strategy of saying, hey, these people are all against us. I'm the victim here. And that's another interesting word that Rudy Giuliani used when he was on a couple of the shows yesterday, is he is cautioning Trump not to fire anyone because he doesn't want to turn them into the victims.
Well, he said it would play right into their hands. I guess, a media narrative and or the critics of the president that if he were to fire Mueller, because Bill asked him about that, it would just play right into their hands.
Exactly. And that's, again, Rudy Giuliani, people think, oh, he's a little out there. He goes on, is he too old for this job? No. He knows exactly what he's doing. And I think some of the advice he's giving Trump, he is actually giving it through things like conversations with Bill Hemmer.
Final point on this, and this was brought up yesterday at a number of Mr. Giuliani's interviews, including the one with Bill. Will the president actually sit for an interview with Robert Mueller, and should he? The fear of a perjury trap seems to be what's out there from the president's side. That's what Mr. Giuliani has said a number of times. Do you think he actually sits for an interview at the end of the day?
That's an excellent question. And, I predict they might come up with a meeting that is, has very strict boundaries. They're going to, both sides are going to sort of negotiate what the limits are. I could be wrong. Now, Trump really wants to do this. And now it sounds, his lawyers have been cautioning him not to. And we've seen actually a couple of his lawyers leave the legal team because they felt he wasn't going to take their advice. But, I feel that I think Donald Trump will feel like if he doesn't do that sit down, people will be wondering, why not? Why, what do you have to hide? And so I think in his mind, there's a lot. But again, you mentioned the perjury trap. Of course, most people that have, big names like Martha Stewart, Bill Clinton, they got in trouble for perjury, not for any actual actions that they did.
Martha Stewart's case handled by one James Comey when he was in the Southern District of New York. Kelly, thanks. Good to see you.
Thanks. Happy Memorial Day.
All right, same to you, Arthel.
Connell, thank you. Emergency crews searching for a missing person after flash floods devastated one of Maryland's historic cities. The rising water ripping through the streets of Ellicott City, Maryland, leaving a trail of destruction for the second time in 2 years.
I can just tell you my heart is broken. Thinking about what the people had gone through here and the people's lives who were devastated 2 years ago and where they rebuilt. And now they're faced with the same daunting task again.
Rich Edson is live in Ellicott City. And Rich, what more can you tell us about the missing person?
Workers are still searching for the 39-year-old man. They say that he was eating at a restaurant at Main Street, which is that street which is right behind me, where you see another tow truck. And we've seen a steady stream of tow trucks come through here to take destroyed, disabled cars from the downtown area of Main Street. His name is Edison Herman, 39 years old, of Severn, Maryland, which is a town close to here. If you look at this stream here, recovery workers over the last 3 to 4 hours have pulled from that small area there a tree with roots on it, a dumpster, and 3 separate cars. As you look to the right over here, this area was all grass just yesterday, and so the floodwaters came through here sweeping cars, asphalt, debris, dumpsters, all throughout this entire area, destroying much of what you're seeing here. And that field off to your right there was filled with about a dozen cars a few hours ago. So the recovery workers have been very busy here through the large part of this morning. We spoke to one man who has started a brewery back 21 years ago. They just celebrated their anniversary, and he said he had just finished repairing his brewery from a flash flood in 2016, and it happened again. He says he plans on rebuilding.
In the end, you know, our real resources, our people, you know, a building is stone and brick and metal. That can be replaced, people can't. And that's the real resource here.
Arthel, in 2016, there was a flash flood here, very similar circumstances where you had several inches of rain in just a couple of hours. That swept through that massive tidal wave that you saw downtown. That was tens of millions of dollars. That episode in 2016 killed 2 people. Here we have 1 person missing, no reported fatalities. But no sense yet of how much this is going to cost, as government officials here have declared a state of emergency and have said this was a once-in-a-thousand-year flood, and now it's happened twice in less than 2 years. Arthel?
Oh, it's so hard on the folks there. And by the way, Mr. Herman, who is missing, is a National Guardsman, so hopefully his skills will somehow save him in this devastating situation for everyone there in Maryland. Thank you very much, Rich.
Unbelievable. Speaking of which, this middle school teacher being called a hero in the Indiana school shooting is now speaking out.
I deeply care for my students and their well-being, so that is why I did what I did that day.
Just ahead, what else that teacher is saying about his actions that day, plus new signs President Trump's summit with the North Korean dictator could still happen. The chances the rogue regime really will denuclearize. That's next.
There needs to be a strong understanding of what both sides, what all 3 sides, frankly, mean by denuclearization.
Indiana middle school teacher is being hailed as a hero for stopping a shooting Friday and now is speaking out for the first time since he tackled and disarmed a student who had entered his classroom with a gun. The science teacher is Jason Seaman, also praising one of the victims, a 13-year-old student who's now recovering from a gunshot wound.
My actions on that day, in my mind, were the only acceptable actions I could have done given the circumstances. I can't say enough how proud of Ella I am and how we all should be. Her courage and strength at such a young age is nothing short of remarkable, and we should all continue to keep her in our minds as she continues to recover.
Now, Seaman himself was also shot during the incident, not seriously injured. Police do have the suspect in custody.
President Trump's tweet yesterday that a U.S. team is in North Korea, along with this weekend's meeting between the leaders of North and South Korea, raising hopes that the canceled meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un could be back on. But the question remains, is North Korea really willing to denuclearize? Some lawmakers are not buying it.
This is a man who has to figure out how to survive in power for 50-something years as a dictator and is probably afraid that if he gets rid of these weapons, at some point, someone's going to take him out. Ultimately, I remain convinced that he does not want to denuclearize. In fact, he will not denuclearize.
Joining me now is Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, former Green Beret. Good to have you here on this Memorial Day weekend. Good to see you. Thank you. I'll start with this, if I may. Do you think the June 12th date for the meeting will stick, and should it?
Well, I believe it should stick if they can get the technical details worked out. But I mean, that's the ultimate question. Can the negotiators do that? But more importantly, Arcella, I think as long as the two principal leaders remain focused on this and they're driving the tempo, yeah, I think they probably could get to that.
And what do you think is the likelihood that North Korea will meet the demands for complete denuclearization?
You know, I share some of the skepticism that Senator Rubio and others are surfacing right now, obviously, because he has demonstrated that he is at many times not a man to be trusted. But at the same time, if we're able to engage Kim on a strategic level and sit down with him and use all of our instruments of power to bring him to the table and maybe even map out a way ahead, I'm not sure why we would be so overtly skeptical in front of the negotiation. My training has always been get in there and start talking and try to figure it out.
And what are those implements of or instruments of power that you mentioned that, you know, in terms of how the U.S. would be able to verify the progress and compliance?
Well, look, I mean, we always default to the military instrument of power, especially when we think about North Korea, right, because of the history there. And it is obviously a very viable U.S. instrument of power. But also, I think we need to think about financial, the way that we can bring not only the financial stick to bear through regional partners like China and things like boycotts, but also, you know, even through, you know, having them look at a positive future for how they grow financially. There's also diplomatic channels. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can bring U.S. power to bear holistically and through regional partners that are in front of us right now that we need to at least give a shot before we default to that military instrument of power unilaterally.
Of course. And you feel optimistic that Kim Jong-un will comply. What is he looking for in return? Is it part legacy? Of course, he's looking to get some economic boosting for his country, but what about his legacy?
Well, let me be clear. I'm not optimistic that he will play the game the way that we're hoping he will. I mean, he has demonstrated multiple times he's a survivor. He's going to look out for the interests of his nation state just like any other leader does. And I think there's some other things going on behind the scenes as well that are nefarious. But I do believe that we can apply instruments of power in a way that apply pressure, both financially, diplomatically, and militarily, not just unilaterally, but through our partners, that he may have. You know, that may be the best choice is for him to sit down with President Trump and map out some options. Beyond that, I would just be guessing at whether or not he'll play ball. But if we can get him to sit down and talk, Arcella, and engage our president, our commander-in-chief, I say we do it.
Okay. Before I go, I want to ask you quickly about your play. It's called Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret. What can you tell us about it quickly, sir?
Yeah, our nonprofit, theheroesjourney.org, is putting a play together to help civilians understand the cost of this long war on our warriors and their families and to help heal the pains of war. And we're going to be rolling it out in 2019 on the stage, and all veteran cast, all veteran music, lifting up the tent on the price of combat. And
that sounds like a wonderful project, Colonel Mann. I wish you success on that. Thank you for your service. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we'll be back after this break.
We come back with a Fox News alert. Lava seeping from Hawaii's Kilauea volcano, reaching a geothermal power plant on the Big Island yesterday, in the process covering at least one of its wells. Hawaii's governor, though, sounding optimistic authorities have the situation under control.
We believe that the PGV site is safe, that the actions that we've taken to quench the wells, to plug the wells, to make sure that we can control any release of hydrogen sulfide will be contained.
Live now to Hawaii, Jeff Paul joins us with the very latest. Jeff?
Well, yeah, no matter how many times the governor insists that this geothermal power plant is safe, the locals who who live in the area, they remain cautious. They're worried that if that lava were to seep inside one of those wells, it could trigger a possible massive explosion or release of poisonous gas. Now, that lava has so far covered one well and is getting closer and closer to covering another. What's fueling concerns, local authorities say this has never happened anywhere else in the world before. Geologists say there are no signs of magma flow stopping, especially near the geothermal power plant. The lava so far has destroyed 82 structures since this volcano first started erupting 3 weeks ago and is now covering nearly 4 square miles.
You don't have a choice. You live here. My folks have been here 25 years. You're on the islands. You respect it. You have to respect it. You don't want it to happen. You never think it's going to happen. But when it happens, you just got to let it go.
Now, there was an outbreak of fast-moving lava from one fissure last night. It caused emergency responders to order an immediate evacuation of several residents as lava began to cover several escape routes and surround even more homes. Now, there's also concerns of the ongoing earthquakes as well as poor air quality. The shifting winds out here are now sending ash and possible sulfur dioxide to new areas. Connell?
Wow, as Jeff says, dealing with something that has literally never been dealt with anywhere in the world before. Jeff, thanks. Arthel.
Connell, thank you. Well, GOP lawmakers divided over immigration.
I would be open to changing that law, but the better law to change is to secure our border and to send a clear message that you cannot continue to enter the United States illegally. It is actually inhumane not to secure our border.
Senator Rubio giving one perspective, but can Republican leaders head off a growing rebellion within their own ranks over DACA before the midterms? Our panel weighs in next. Plus more on our continuing coverage on Memorial Day across America as we pay tribute to the service members who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. Memorial Day observances taking place earlier today in Washington on this very special day in our nation. That includes the National World War II Memorial on the National Mall. Nearly 20 veterans of the greatest generation have been laying wreaths at the Freedom Wall in remembrance of their fallen comrades. Doug McKelway is live at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, where another ceremony is getting underway this hour. Hi, Doug.
Hi, Artel. This is one of those days where you really can appreciate Washington. Such a departure from the sausage making, the divisiveness of Capitol Hill when the city comes together at these sacred places to honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice. It began this morning at the World War II Memorial. As you just alluded to, there are fewer and fewer veterans of that war who are able to appreciate that solemn ceremony. It continued later at Arlington National Cemetery, where the president honored those who paid the ultimate sacrifice. It continues right now here at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, where the ceremony is ongoing, and it will continue after that at 2 p.m. when the nation's largest Memorial Day parade winds its way up Independence Avenue. For the families of the thousands of this nation's war dead, this particular day has a different meaning for each and every one of them. I want you to hear one man's story. His name is Arthur Choten. His father died in a Jeep accident right after the European surrender was signed in World War II. Here's his story.
I never knew my father. He was sent overseas when I was 10 weeks old and killed a month before my first birthday. For my entire life, my mother couldn't talk about him without crying. I didn't want to make her cry, so I didn't ask.
And another story from Jill Stevenson, who told the Chicago Tribune today that she received a phone call some years ago from her son's commanding officer in Afghanistan, who told her that he had been badly wounded. She flew to Washington, met her son at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, where doctors told her he would not survive, and would she consider donating his son's organs. She agreed to do so, and as a result of that, several people are alive today as a result of her son's heart, his kidneys, and liver. She said there's one thing she does not like about this day, and it is when people say Happy Memorial Day. Fully understandable, but there is a different view for all the people who are enjoying sales at the local mall today or enjoying the traditional start of summer vacation. There is a realization for many of them that this day represents an appreciation of the freedoms they have won. The right to democracy, the right to be left alone that was provided by so many of those people who made the ultimate sacrifice. Arthel, back to you.
Powerful stories, extraordinary sacrifice. Doug McKelway, thank you so much. Conrad?
All right, Orfel, we have some politics for you, even on this Memorial Day Monday, as House GOP leaders are trying to contain a battle that's been brewing over immigration reform ahead of the midterms. Conservative members of the House pushing for a vote on a hardline bill, more moderate Republicans gaining support for a measure that would force a series of votes, likely including a DACA fix. Here's Speaker Paul Ryan.
We're having very productive conversations with our members about how we can get the policies and the votes that people are looking for, and doing it in a process that actually has a chance of making it into law. Because ultimately, isn't that what we're supposed to do here? Write laws? If we go down this path or that path, meaning failed paths that are guaranteed no law gets made, it's kind of an exercise in futility as far as I'm concerned.
Let's bring in Capri Cafaro, who's a former Democratic Ohio State Senator and these days an executive in residence at American University. And Boyd Matheson with us as well, former Chief of Staff to Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah. You first, Boyd, on this whole idea. I don't think it's lost on any of us as we watch Speaker Ryan speak about this, that he's, a lame duck there in trying to lead this House to immigration reform or legislation of any kind. How does that kind of play into this debate between moderates and conservatives in his caucus?
Well, I think it actually has less to do with Speaker Ryan and more to do with the total dysfunction of Congress, both the Senate and the House. And I think you've got a group of members on both sides of the aisle who have said, you know what, I was elected by the people to come to Washington, debate, amend, compromise, get solutions, and vote. And I think you've seen with this discharge petition that people want to have the conversation in front of the American people. Far too often, especially on issues like immigration, these things are done behind closed doors, thousands of pages of bills, bill text that nobody's read. And I think you're seeing this increased angst and frustration amongst members of both parties who just want to do what they were sent there to do. And so I think it's less about Paul Ryan. He's in a tough spot, obviously, coming down the home stretch. But I think this has more to do with how the House should function and how Congress should get the job done.
And you wonder, Capri, about anybody getting the job done. If you ask anyone inside the White House about legislative priorities for 2018, they'll have immigration reform out or near the top of the list, or immigration legislation. But you do wonder now, in reading and watching all of this, if they're going to be able to get anything done. What do you think?
I think it's going to be a real challenge. I mean, partially because, this is the most recent example of the divisions inside the Republican caucus between the Freedom Caucus, the more, hardline conservative members, and the more moderates who, as we've alluded to, are pushing for what's called a discharge petition to basically get these bills to the floor to debate. We have to remember that immigration is, something that a lot of people feel very passionate about. You have members in places like California and Florida where the immigration issue is very personal and has an impact on the 2018 election as well. And so and then you have President Trump, who basically is saying, I'm not going to sign anything that doesn't have money for a border wall. So I think the odds of something coming together and actually getting passed and signed into law are relatively unlikely. But I do think that the American people are really thirsty for government to actually work, and hopefully they'll at least have an opportunity to debate in a public manner.
On that point of a discharge petition, which is what it's known as, Boyd, that was brought up by Capri, that's being pushed, I believe, by the centrists who need a number of signatures, 200 and some odd signatures to get it to the floor. And it would force a vote, right? It would force a vote on a series of different measures, and that could include this DACA fix. So that brings us back to the point. The president said, hey, Capri said it, the president said, I'm not for this unless you fund the border wall. So that kind of stops things, doesn't it?
Well, actually, I don't think it does, because the thing that's crazy about Congress is we could solve 94.5% of the immigration issue in an afternoon. Everybody agrees we need border security. We need to have a better entry-exit system. We need to make it easier to come here legally, and on down the list. Everybody agrees with that. Sadly, what's happening is people use this as a wedge issue to win political campaigns and to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's time for the American people to say enough. On a Memorial Day where we often quote Lincoln about those who gave that last full measure of devotion, what we often miss is most of that speech was for us. It's for us, the living, to be here dedicated. It's for us to increase devotion, for us to be highly resolved. Lincoln knew that those who gave that last full measure had passed their test, but it's for us. And so the American people should expect more, demand more, not less. We can get this done, but we have to have someone who's going to stand up and say, enough is enough. Let's get what we can get to.
And as Capri says, the odds are low, Boyd. You think the odds are?
I think it's doable. If you force the issue, put it on the table. There's four bills there. Everybody can pick one, get to it, and then put it on the president's desk.
And I think
he'll sign
that's
it.
the challenge, Boyd. I think that's the challenge, is that, you have a bipartisan one, for example, that does include, some measures surrounding DACA and also money for border security. That's a bipartisan measure that's a little bit more moderate. Maybe that has the best chance of success. But because there's a lot of choices, again, the American people want transparency and an opportunity to see this debate happen in front of them, and hopefully the people that are representing us in Congress are going to make the right decisions for all Americans.
I hear what both of you are saying. As a political issue, though, and I know Boyd has been making the point to try to take the political back and forth out of this as much as possible. The president needs that border security money to be in there, right? I mean, he needs that to happen. He promised it during the campaign. We're heading into a midterm year. He needs that wall funding. Isn't that fair, Boyd? To get otherwise, don't you think he'll stick to that, the veto threat?
I think if he gets some sort of funds for some sort of border security, whether it's all wall or whatever it is, I don't think that's going to be the issue in the end. I think the president could take a huge win here by just going through that process and allowing it to play out. Because when it plays out, I think we'll get something that's actually reasonable, that will give us the security we need. And we have to remember that rule of law and compassion are compatible when it comes to immigration issues. We can get there.
All right, we'll see.
Let's
Optimistic,
hope so.
Boyd. Good outlook on a holiday weekend. We'll see if it does work out, because they've tried a number of times to no avail so far. Boyd and Capri, good to see both of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Connell, a historic treaty that ended half a century of war now in question as one country heads for its most divisive presidential race in decades. Plus, President Trump looking to impose new tariffs on vehicles and auto parts. But some of his advisors, top ones, are asking at what cost to American workers. The potential fallout is up next. Well, there are new reports that two of President Trump's top economic advisors are worried the president's proposed tariffs on imported cars, trucks, and auto parts could kill jobs here in the U.S. Those advisors said to include Larry Kudlow, director of the National Economic Council. Joining us to discuss the potential financial impact of those tariffs, Gene Marks is here. He's a certified public accountant and small business advocate. Gene, so let's get your take on Larry Kudlow's assessment that the auto taxes would kill American jobs and hurt American consumers.
Yeah, sure, Phil. I mean, listen, Mr. Kudlow's position is absolutely right. I mean, when you look at what a tariff would do, the president is proposing potentially a 25% tariff on autos that are imported here into the U.S. from a bunch of other countries. That would increase the cost of cars significantly. I mean, for smaller cars in general, could add $4,000 to $5,000 onto a price tag for a car. And what that means for you and me is when we go to buy a car like that, it may put us off from buying those cars. We might hold back on those decisions. We might choose to buy an American-made car, but maybe we wouldn't. And the issue is that there will be a fallout effect on not only manufacturers here, but people that supply parts and aftermarket companies and service companies as well. So it's kind of, it's a big issue that how it will affect consumers and what they'll do. Bear in mind as well that this is a time where gas prices are also rising. So, car manufacturers are worried that that could also put a dampen on their overall sales. I don't think that the issue is going to be as big as we think. I mean, Kudlow's question is, why are we even bothering doing this? I mean, 60% of the cars that are sold here in the U.S. are made in the U.S. and there are dozens of plants here that are owned by foreign car makers that employ Americans. I mean, I drive a Nissan Murano, and 94% of the Nissans that are sold in the U.S. are made in the U.S. So I think the question that Mr. Kudlow is asking is, why are we going about doing this? It could have a big impact on jobs here. And really already there is a lot of manufacturing activity already from foreign manufacturers building that stuff here in the U.S.
Now, on the other hand, the president's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, thinks the tariffs are a good idea. I mean, how would the American auto industry and consumers benefit?
Well, I understand Mr. Navarro's position as well. Look, he advises the president on trade. That is his job. And it's more of a politically motivated, intentions as opposed to Mr. Kudlow's. So when it comes to trade, I believe in free trade. I think a lot of companies do that as well, but that's not really reality. There is an imbalanced world out there and unfairness with a lot of countries. So Mr. Navarro was like, listen, if we have a trade imbalance or there are unfair trading practices in other countries, whether it's Canada, Mexico, Japan, he believes that using tariffs as a weapon will create a more fair playing field for American companies. And that does make a lot of sense. I mean, listen, tariffs have been tried for hundreds of years. I mean, it goes back to Alexander Hamilton to try and make sure that we're doing our best for American companies. I think that's what the president, that's absolutely what he wants to do, is he wants to make things as good as possible for American companies and their workers. But at the same time, imposing too high a tariffs could easily just have repercussion tariffs by other countries as well that could impact sales here and also lose jobs. So again, I sympathize with Mr. Navarro's point of view. I more sympathize with Mr. Kudlow's point of view. It really doesn't seem to be that worth it. I mean, the other thing, Arthur, you got to keep in mind when it comes to the president is that he's an experienced negotiator and he's very good at it. He is, when it comes to trade with other countries, he likes to take his, sort of, heavy-handed stance as an opening type of thing. And that's what he's doing here when he's talking about auto tariffs. The thing is, though, is that he's done this elsewhere. He's done this with South Korea. He's done this with intellectual property, abuses by China. He's done this with NAFTA. He puts these things out there right now saying we're going to have a big tariff. We're not afraid to do that. He should be saying that. We're the world's largest country. But I think in the end, he then negotiates this down to something that's more reasonable. And I think it's just an opening thing right now.
Okay, Gene Marks, thank you so much. I appreciate your analysis. Got to run, though. Thank you, Gene. See you again.
Thanks, Arthel. Take care.
All right. We have this new study out on how important sleep is to living longer, which we all know, right? But it has big news in it for those of us who can't seem to get at least 7 hours of rest during the work week. So we'll tell you about that. Plus, we're tracking tropical storm Alberto as it nears landfall along the Florida Panhandle, the biggest threat to the region just ahead.
We're going to unplug everything that we can unplug. We're going to lift it up the best that we can. And we're just going to let Mother Nature take its course.
So this could be good news for those of us who like to sleep in on the weekends. There is now a study that shows those who do tend to live a longer life. Dr. Nicole Sapphire, board-certified radiologist, with us here in the studio today. Good to see you.
Great to be here.
Thanks for coming on. I was reading this study basically says that if you sleep during the week, say, 4 or 5 hours, as some people do because of their jobs, you can almost make up for it on the weekend, which I thought forever wasn't true. What do you make of this?
It's interesting. It's a little different than what we've heard in the past. I'm very happy to be here Memorial Day to give a little bit of good news to those of us who like to sleep in on the weekends. And we know in the past that you need to have sleep for your health. It can not only impair your judgment, poor decision making, it can also, if you don't get enough sleep, cause increased blood pressure and obesity. In the past, we've always known that less than 5 hours of sleep every night is not good for your health. And this large study that just came out of Sweden reconfirmed that for us. But what was interesting out of the study was that they said for people who get 5 hours of sleep during the week and then maybe 7 hours of sleep on the weekend, it actually doesn't have any change in their health benefits. They actually go back to normal as though they were having 7 hours of sleep all week long. And that's really different than what we've kind of been trained to think.
You always tell people would always tell you forever, well, it's nice to sleep 12 hours. You might feel better, but you can never make up sleep. And this seems to go against that a little bit.
This large study, again, over 43,000 people in it were followed over 13 years. They said if you slept 5 hours a night every night for the whole week, you had a 65% increased risk of death compared to those who sleep maybe 7 hours. But if you got that 7 hours on the weekend, this just went back to normal. And I mean, I find that a little stunning.
Right, so you wouldn't necessarily be passing this along to all your patients right away.
Well, I love the idea of binge sleeping on the weekends, but
yeah, we all do. It makes us feel better.
Right. This is an observational study. We have to remember that you can't have cause and effect. And if you can't get sleep during the week, just try and get it on the weekend.
Can I ask you a medical question that might seem a little silly at first, but why, medically, why scientifically do people who don't sleep as much die sooner? What's the reason?
There's actually a lot that goes into it, and you can't just say for one person. Just being in Sweden alone is very different than being in the United States. But on a global sense, essentially, your metabolism's down when you're sleep deprived. You're tired. Your metabolism's down. You have poor decision making. There are actually higher accidents and injuries in those that are sleep deprived. They have cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes. There's a whole plethora of diseases that come when your body is just not getting the replenishment it requires.
And there is an idea you could actually sleep too much.
Absolutely. The same study has shown if you sleep 8 hours or more, you have a 25% increased risk of death. So
this is just...
stick to that 7 hours if you can.
You can't win here. So the idea is to average 7 hours.
You know,
if you
everything
can, I
in
guess,
moderation. Right? Live as healthy as you can and sleep when you can, I guess.
Good
But
to
not
see
more
you.
than 8 hours a night.
Have a good sleep tonight. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. All right, Parthel.
Good night rest to both of you. Okay, a historic summit could be getting back on track as meetings between North and South Korea reignite hopes for peace on the peninsula. We'll go live to Seoul straight ahead.